Good evening. Welcome to the Southbridge School Committee meeting. Tonight is Tuesday, April 28th, 2015. Please join the school committee in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. The time is 7 o'clock. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call, please.
Mrs. Congdon?
Present.
Mr. Leva?
Present.
Dr. Page?
Present.
Mrs. Donovan?
Present.
Mrs. Quinney?
Present.
Mr. Abrahamson?
Present.
Mrs. McLaughlin?
Present.
All present.
Thank you very much. Now on the agenda is public input. Is there anybody from the public who would like to address the school committee this evening?
Good evening. Sean Moriarty, 44 Maggie Lane. Just come up briefly in reference to something we brought up last night, and that is this upcoming weekend, Saturday, there is a double header of events which benefit both the food share program here in town, but also the recently reformed Middle High School Booster Club. There are two events at the Middle High School softball field, 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. There will be an alumni game between former baseball and softball players of the Pioneers years gone by. And if anybody's still interested, we have it pretty well covered, but we could still use a few extra bodies just to be safe. Feel free to touch base with myself or Councilor Carrasco. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but in terms of looking for numbers, at 7 o'clock we will also have a game, town hall officials and employees going against the school side. And the town hall side has many numbers. I wouldn't say it's the most talented group per se at the moment, but we certainly could use more on the school side as well. I know at the moment school committee member Levo has offered to play. I know a couple others that have taken part in other events will not be able to because they won't be around, but if anybody up here on the dais, whether students, central office, or school committee, or anybody at any of the schools, quite frankly, that want to come out and support the Booster Club for your middle high school, again, feel free to let us know, touch base. Again, that's 6 o'clock is the alumni game, 7 o'clock would be the town and school game. They're both slow pitch, co-ed softball, friendly games, hopefully. And we just ask that people, if they do come, to either and or bring some non-perishable goods for food share, as well as to bring some cash to help out your middle high school booster club. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moriarty. Is there anybody else from the public who would like to address the school committee this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is approval of the consent agenda. There are no items on the consent agenda this evening. Chairperson's announcements. I do not have any specific announcements. I was hoping to give this time to DESE for their quarterly progress report, which is the next item on the agenda. So I'd like to welcome to the podium, please, Mr. Rob Curtin, Ms. Laura Rashane, and Ms. Patricia Williams. Good evening, and thank you for coming.
Good evening. Madam Chairwoman, Superintendent Stanton, thank you very much for having us. My name is Rob Curtin, and I'm happy to be back here in front of you tonight. I am the Director of the Center for School and District Accountability at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and my comments will be brief before I turn it over to my colleagues for a more formal presentation. We are here tonight to present to you a progress report on a quarterly progress report on the Accelerated Improvement Plan, and to make sure that we have provided you with the information that you need to have on each of the objectives that are in the report. I believe you've been provided with a copy of it in advance of the meeting that hopefully you've had a chance to look at. So my colleague Laura Rashane will walk through that report for you. And be able to answer any questions. Also, Pat Williams is here, who is the monitor for the district, can answer any questions you might have also. So the two of them will be able to answer the more detailed questions than I am able to answer. The second point that I want to make before I turn it over to my colleagues is to very quickly remind you that we are on schedule for a district review of Southbridge. The exact dates are still being worked out. The one caveat that I need to say about this is that it is subject to appropriation. It is a line item in the state budget, so we are dependent upon that happening. But we are on schedule. Southbridge will be one of the first districts that we review in the 15-16 school year, so we tend not to come into school districts in September. So that would put us on target for one of the first couple weeks of October would be roughly what we'd be looking at. I will be in touch with the superintendent as soon as I can nail down those dates. More importantly, as soon as I can nail down the funding to do that. I will set those dates, communicate both informally and with a formal letter to the superintendent to announce the dates that we will be coming for the review. I briefly, last time I was here, went over the review that, and sort of the protocols. Very quickly, if I can just go over that, just to bring everybody up to speed, since it's the last time I will probably be in front of you, or I might be in front of you before that review. We send a team of independent reviewers. There are no ESE staff on the review team, with the possible exception, sometimes we send a staff member to help with scribing. But we will send an independent team in. They will be on site in Southbridge for usually 4 days, meeting with officials in the school department, local officials, union officials, building leaders, and teachers. They will also observe classrooms in each of the schools in Southbridge. And then what comes out of that 4-day site visit is a written report. You may have seen others that have been published before. They are available on our website to see, but they come with a written report comes out of the review, and then I'm happy to come back and present that report to you if that would be helpful to you. Some school committees take me up on that offer, some do not. It is up to your school committee to decide whether or not you'd like me to come back and present those findings to you, but I'm happy to do that if that's the case, but that's for next fall. So more presently, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Laura Rashane from my staff. She is going to walk through a formal presentation of the progress report on the Accelerated Improvement Plan for you. Pat Williams and Laura will be able to answer any questions that you might have, and we're happy to take as many questions as you have, since you have our full attention for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to see all of you again. Thank you for having us. The report that we'll be discussing tonight covers the period of January through March. The monitoring activities this period included participation in several district meetings as well as school visits. And just by way of an overview, during this period, obviously there was a leadership transition in the district. That reorganized leadership brought shifts in emphasis, as would be expected, and one notable example of that is an increased presence of district leaders in schools. The district has continually revisited and has been updating the Accelerated Improvement Plan. As part of that process, there was a meeting in February with the purpose of reflecting on and clarifying the focus of the AIP, particularly given the transition in leadership. That meeting included district leaders, school leaders, teachers, the plan manager, plan monitor, other representatives from the department, as well as representatives from the district and school assistance center. And so subsequently, district leaders used information from that meeting, as well as their own reflection and analysis, in order to revise several AIP benchmarks for the remainder of the year. So our next report will include those updated benchmarks. As well, the monitor's observations and information and data reported by the district indicate that there remain challenges at Southbridge Middle High School, which I'll describe in more detail. So I'd like to just briefly go over each strategic objective. Oh, thank you. The first strategic objective relates to improving curriculum and instructional practices. District leaders became aware that some benchmarks in the AIP were not easily measured using the existing Learning Walk model, and so they have been revisiting that approach and have begun to identify ways to improve that model. And that process has included receiving training from the DSAC about a Learning Walk protocol. But throughout this process, district leaders have continued their work in schools. So this is just something that they're rethinking. Other implementation under this objective, prior AIP reports described plans for meeting the needs of student subgroups, specifically English language learners and students with disabilities. So the next phase of that planning work during this period included planning related to professional development and staffing to address those identified needs. So the next steps related to this objective relate to or include curriculum revision, which is planned for this summer. So we're suggesting that the district carry through with those plans, and that district leaders continue their school visits with an intense focus on instruction and on principals' instructional leadership. And as well, we recommend that the district continue to implement plans to meet the needs of English language learners and students with disabilities. The second strategic objective is to expand and embed the use of data, K-12, to foster a cycle of continuous improvement throughout the district. A great deal of data related to this objective was analyzed during this period. Data from the second and third administrations of Achievement Network assessments became available. ANET results on the second administration were mixed. There were some grades and subgroups that met the benchmark for A2, the second administration. A3 was still being analyzed at the time this report was written. This analysis provided an opportunity for the district to reflect about practices currently in place. So some examples of that include the fact that the district realized that there are some issues with coding that makes aggregation of data difficult, so that's something that they are working to address. Another issue raised was some misalignment between standards taught and the standards that were assessed on ANET. So again, the plan to revise and align curriculum this summer, our understanding is that we'll address that in advance of implementing the new MAP assessments next year. Another issue that arose from the data analysis was the issue of separating high and low performing students into different classrooms at the elementary level, which is a concern. There was a great deal of data from Southbridge Middle High School as well. At the middle school level, compared to the end of the second quarter last year, there were some improvements in tardies. There were some indicators that remained flat. However, the number of course failures and the number of students failing courses increased compared to this time last year. The number of students suspended by the end of the second quarter was the same as last year, but the number of suspension days increased to a total of 187 days by the end of the second quarter. At the high school level, proficiency on high school quarterly assessments was very low. Data for other indicators was also concerning. The number of suspensions increased compared to the same time last year, as well as the number of suspension days. The number of courses failed and the number of students failing courses also increased compared to this time last year. I do want to point out that in many cases there was improvement between quarter one and quarter two this year. However, there were still some declines compared to last year, which is the AIP benchmark, comparing one period of time to the previous years, the same point in the previous year. And district leaders report that AIP strategies for supporting students at Southbridge Middle High School have not been well implemented. So the next steps related to this objective include those related to data analysis, continuing the analysis of A3 so that that can be compared to A2. Reviewing, in light of the data analysis, the effectiveness and the equity of classroom assignment policies at the elementary level, and urgent attention to the Southbridge Middle High School, in particular understanding the reasons for the low outcomes on the engagement indicators that I mentioned, and identifying specific and intense supports for students that can be implemented right away. The third objective relates to improving educator effectiveness. So as I mentioned, the superintendent and assistant superintendent have been visiting schools weekly, providing feedback on instruction and on principals' feedback to teachers. There's been training for coaches and for teachers related to improving instruction. and that the district reports that mid-year evaluations of teachers have been completed on time. The next step related to this objective relates to the submission of the 2015-16 Accelerated Improvement Plan. Right now, the district is planning to submit that in June and is looking to continue clarifying benchmarks in order to gauge progress related to teaching and learning. And finally, the fourth objective relates to, focuses on increasing parent and community involvement to enhance student learning. So principals reported numerous parent outreach activities at all schools during this period that had strong attendance, and there were also multiple forms of communication. And so the next step the district is planning is to deliver a survey at the end of the year to gauge parents' families' feelings about whether they are more informed and supported by the schools. So that will be an important next step. So as you know, every strategic objective in the AIP receives 2 ratings, a process rating, which relates to the implementation of that initiative, and a performance rating, which relates to progress toward goals for each initiative. So for process ratings, all AIP initiatives received a rating of technical implementation, which means that the stated activities have been completed, but more work or time is needed for that initiative to be fully executed. For performance ratings, most initiatives received a rating of partially reached performance goals, indicating that there has been some progress, but more is needed. And the exception to that is Initiative 2.2, which is to use a variety of data to identify and develop support systems and practices to improve the performance of ELL and SWD students. Data from the district, particularly from the middle high school, indicates that students are not yet receiving the supports that they need to fully succeed. So that does it for our overview. Pat and Rob and I are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? I'll go to this side. Anybody have questions over here? Dr. Page?
Thanks,
please.
Madam Chair. So you mentioned several times that the students aren't receiving the supports they need, in particular ELL. Can you give us an example of what types of supports that you think we're lacking and what it would take to address those particular needs?
So actually, there's a footnote in the report that describes several strategies that are laid out in the Accelerated Improvement Plan. And when we initially reviewed the plan and approved it, those really seemed to be high-quality strategies. So one example is a student advisory, an ombudsman program, some different programs that would provide individualized attention to students. I can't say that I know in detail everything that's happening at the high school, but in talking with district leaders, it sounds like a lot of that has not yet been implemented. And maybe Superintendent Stanton can say more about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last statement.
Oh, I was just saying maybe Superintendent Stanton can say more about that. Yes?
Yeah.
Particularly at the Southbridge Middle High School, one of the things that we are working toward is tiered intervention. That model is currently up and functional for both behavior and academics at the elementary level. Although it is understaffed and under-resourced, the struggle is still with the middle school, high school, getting tiered instruction in a meaningful way implemented. And then the next step for the entire district is to analyze the interventions that are being used both for behavior and academics to see what's working with our students and make adjustments as needed.
Okay, thank you. Should I continue?
Yep, please.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm always a little bit leery of when you compare data like this is you're comparing this year to last year.
Correct.
This is basically, it can be depending on a variety of different circumstances. And so, and one of the things that we became aware of not too long ago through Superintendent Stanton is we've had a large influx of students with disabilities into the middle high school this year, just that came in from out-of-district placements. And so I think it's maybe more of a comment than a question. And, so I don't know that it's really fair to be comparing this year's 10th graders with last year's 10th graders. And so are there plans, and I think I've asked this question a lot, and I don't seem to be seeing any kind of analysis of this, is there a way that we can say, okay, what's last year's 9th graders and how are they comparing as 10th graders this year? Are you looking at that in any kind of way? Or?
That's certainly an analysis that we could conduct. I mean, we use the data that the district provides, and frankly, we report on the benchmarks that are in the district's accelerated improvement plan, and so certainly there's flexibility in terms of how, I mean, we think it's really important to look at these indicators, but how those are measured in terms of measuring it by cohort, quarter to quarter, I mean, there's definitely some flexibility.
Okay.
So we could certainly, as the district is looking to develop their plan for next year, that's certainly something we could
Okay,
discuss.
so I guess that would be my follow-up. Would you recommend that would be in our next year's AIP? that would be a way we should start analyzing the data, looking at how individual students are tracking compared to their previous performance. Are they improving or not? Because you did say that you saw some improvements between quarter one and quarter two of this year.
Yes.
But it seems to be overshadowed by we're really, really bad compared to last year. And so it seems like, excuse me, it seems to me like there may be some indication that we're making some improvements with the students this year as time is marching through this year, and, you know, as opposed to comparing it to last year.
Yep.
Okay, that's more of a comment, I realize.
So if I may, I think it's important to identify, I mean, there's multiple ways we can analyze the data, right? We could look at from year to year, cohort to cohort from one year to the next, so 9th to 10th grade, or you can look at from quarter to quarter, right? It's important to have a baseline so you can know relative to what, so that you know that the numbers, or to give some context to them. When we're developing the AIP for next year, I think it's certainly things we can consider. It is incumbent upon the district to provide that data to us. So if that's the way we go, then we're going to have to make sure the district has the capability to provide that data to us, because the interim assessment data is not something that we have at the department, for example, and the real-time sort of data on suspensions and tardies and things like that aren't something that we collect on a regular basis at the department, especially at the interim assessment level. So it's just, I remember the same variation of the question the last time we were here, and as we go on to developing next year's AIP, I think it's something to take in consideration about how we're going to measure. But I do think that there's value in all three of those ways, because especially, you know, we know that in a lot of districts that even from, if you look at a cohort of 9th graders to the 10th grade, that population changes from year to year also, right? So you're going to have that transience affects even the cohort also.
Yeah, you could, I mean, I would imagine, people that are in the district know the data or know the students or whatever, you could correct for those kinds of anomalies, I would imagine. So I guess my maybe point or comment, maybe more than a question, is that I think we need to be analyzing the data a little more thoroughly in order to make better informed decisions in terms of figuring out where are the roots of the problems. And in a lot of this, at least currently the way I'm looking at it, I'm not seeing a capability of doing that. Yeah, we do have